What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update of sorts to Drova, Forsaken Kin, which is a game that released all the way back in October of 2024, which, believe it or not, has been like 6 months ago already. More importantly, though, Drova was one of my favorite indie games from last year. Which is not an unusual case, as a lot of people enjoyed Drova, but following that initial really positive reception, developer Just2D started looking into the feasibility of making something like a DLC for the game, and instead opted for 3 major updates put out as major content patches alongside the normal bug fixes. This means that 6 months later, relatively recently, back in the end of March to be a little more specific, Drova received its final content update, patch 1.3, and while they will continue bug fixing as necessary, they've largely moved on to their next project. So for the most part, Drova is largely in its final state, and I wanted to, because I enjoyed it so much, kind of go over some of these updates and things that have happened since I reviewed the game. Now, as I'm moving through all of these changes and updates, obviously they've made a lot of bug fixes. One of their main focuses right out of the gate was fixing things like soft locks or game-breaking bugs, and they've done a lot of that type of stuff. So while it's important, it's not the kind of thing I'm focused on here, because that kind of stuff is mostly just a given these days. Well, ideally anyway, I suppose not always, but we're going to focus on the big changes these have brought. Starting first then with patch 1.1. So patch 1.1 was largely focused at some highly requested features. It introduced a quest chain to give you access to fast travel to hop around the map easier, because while it's not a terribly big map, walking from end to end of it could certainly get a little tedious. And to help other people out as well, they added an option to respec by gaining an item, and those two things combined, I would say, are the primary things that patch changed. But we did get some other stuff, namely in the form of adjusted dialogue and added quest options with patch 1.1, allowing you to approach some things in a way that, with a full release and all these players approaching it, resulted in some requests. As an example, you could rescue a highly regarded pig without a substantial loss to yourself, as it were, just to give an example. And what's more, this patch also expanded the customization options available for those of us who like to play on keyboard and mouse. That is to say, they opened up the keybinds and let you change more of it. So there's that. But that does bring us to patch 1.2. Patch 1.2 was all about difficulty options, including insane and hardcore mode, letting people experience the much more difficult versions of Drova that this offered, be that separately or all together. So hardcore mode is basically more traditional Iron Man mode. If you die once, it doesn't actually delete your save or anything, but it does kick you down to the next version of that difficulty mode. And then insane mode, in addition to, adjusting stats and things like that, it actually goes a step farther and introduces new enemy behaviors. So enemies that would normally be a little difficult to deal with now have like different movesets and stuff they could pull off, and in some cases there's even new variants of those enemies that will pop up altogether, adding some unique flavor to that specific difficulty mode. But they also did a little bit of that for the base game as well. So in some cases they added multiple new enemy variants, some which you would always see just on normal or whatever, and then variants that would only pop up when you are on insane, as an example. Now, another sort of aspect of that, though, is they added an extra armor set. So in Drova, much like Gothic, a lot of progression is centered around getting a set of armor from your faction. This means that in the early game, you're limited to lesser armor sets. Now, the sort of catch to that is most people who are playing Drova played the majority of their time in Act 1, and the best armor you could get there was substantially worse than the faction armor, so it was a massive upgrade when you finally got it. And while that is intended to be an upgrade, they also wanted to give people a slightly smoother progression there, so they added the heavy leather armor set to obviously just smooth out that transition, which is also useful for higher difficulties where, if you're trying to do everything, you're probably going to want that as a step up to protect yourself anyway. This patch also, though, included a lot of balancing. They changed how food buffs you, so it's actually even more effective, especially in the later levels, where it would normally have fallen off, because they wanted that food buff to be important, but once you got to the late game, it kind of just wasn't. So they buffed it to make it more useful throughout the game, and that's just one example of the substantial amount of balancing they did to all sorts of stuff, including abilities and their costs and whatnot. So patch 1.2 was substantial, but patch 1.3 really takes the cake. Named The Flesh Rises, This is our most recent update, and as I mentioned, as the final content update planned, they also expressed very clearly that outside of bug fixes and stuff as necessary, they're moving on to their next project, which they aren't ready to talk about yet. Now, this update is very substantial because it sort of fleshed out, pun intended, the most mysterious portion of the map, this sort of corrupted and overgrown fleshy expanse known as the Red Moor. Obviously, I don't want to spoil this for you if you haven't done it, but there's new quests and content to see there that actually substantially adds on to at least that section of the games. So there's that, but it actually didn't stop there. They also added what they're calling the Old Magic, which is magic you can cast without runestones that are typically necessary, and they even took that a step farther because they knew people wanted to play as a sort of more mage-oriented character, so to enable that, they added this type of magic, which runs off of your mind stat. They also added weapons in the early game you could use to facilitate that as well, which is going to enable you to focus more on a mage-oriented style of game. And if that wasn't enough, they added even more stuff in the form of 2 new dungeons, one for the new content in the Red Moor, but also a separate new dungeon, which relates to the Bygones, or the mysterious civilization that you can find ruins of. And that's to say nothing of all the other items and interesting options that were added. They even added some quality of life stuff here that, say, marked treasure maps as found, so you didn't just pick them up thinking you were still looking for something. And they also went on to balance some things further. Some of which was for the insane difficulty. Unsurprisingly, that was out in the wild for a little while here, so they balanced and adjusted some of that based on feedback, before topping it off with more bug fixes. So that's kind of everything to know about Drova major update-wise since it launched, but I kind of wanted to end the video by just saying that I think it was really awesome that they supported this game after the fact based on player feedback, and that while they initially were thinking about doing that as DLC, they of course instead released it as several free content updates that I think made an already really great game that much better. And in the current gaming landscape where everyone and their mother seems to be talking about how to charge gamers more money, with rumors of prices going up to like $80 or $90, not least of which because Nintendo is actually doing that with the Switch 2 as an example, seeing developers choose not to do that where possible is really commendable. And because of all that, while Drova was already a really great game, with all of those free content updates, I think this game for $25 really is a steal. And given just how much I enjoyed it, I am obviously very interested in what Just2D, the developer, does in the future and what this next project they're working on is. So hopefully you'll still be around with me to cover that, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about all this down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.